And Jordana, please tell us who you are and what you do.
Sounds good. I am Jordana Zeldin. I am a sales coach. I am the founder of a sales coaching consultancy called Spring Training. And I help sellers tap into everything they intuitively know about being a human being outside of selling, to bring that stuff into their selling, to have better relationships and better conversations, and ultimately better results. So that's what I do.
Fun fact about Jordana, I think she's smiling 99% of the time.
Is that true?
Those are the stats I've seen. Bryan, please.
Hey, Bryan Whittington, all things sales, right? So we look at sales talent as a service. So how do you hire really good salespeople? Because even bad ones hire or interview well. Sales development, how do you do it effectively? And then sales data. You need it to be able to get a hold of these people. So we do all things sales.
And
Bryan, amazing podcast. Like
yeah. Thanks. Yeah. We got the podcast, Talent, Sales, and Scale show. And by the way, I'm the founder of a little company called EBS Growth. I guess I should say that.
Yeah. And Bryan's always humble, used to fly big planes, which I think is super cool. But Trent, tell us who you are. And you might have to tell us, I can't remember now, if you root for a hockey team.
Yes, we root for the Blackhawks here in Chicago. So sorry to all my Canadian friends. But I'm Trent, CMO at Prewrite app. Prewrite is a storytelling software used by podcasters, screenwriters, salespeople to tell better stories. I'm also managing principal at Leadleo, which is a sales agency. So I kind of run the gamut with all you guys. So looking forward to another great conversation.
Super. Thanks, Trent. And I think Trent, funny side story, like over a year ago, you were on our first episode.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
There's like a historic thing today.
There's a gift in the mail.
Probably a Blackhawks suck shirt, right?
It's the U.S. Postal Service, so it got lost. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah, it's your second dose of the vaccine. All right, Trevor. You gave us a great backstory via email, but I would love for you to just maybe, let us know again, what the problem I guess you're trying to solve. Of course, who you are. We'd love to hear a bit more, and then how you think we can help you in the next, 50 minutes.
Totally. I did read the format. I've watched a couple of these previously coming in and doing this. I come from a very strict startup pitch background. Mm-hmm. I mean, the majority of people that I want to talk to don't have more than 3 to 5 minutes to give me to talk to them. So over the years, I've just come into a place where pitches are very succinct of pain, problem, solution, cost of solution, how fast can we get the solution done? And so I'm hoping that I can get through this, I can be thorough, and that the nature of this is quite simple too. It's not a very complex product or situation. It's pretty direct. So I think that I can get through this quite quickly, and I'm looking forward to the feedback circle that we have with everyone in the room to look at this problem. And I think, spending of that 25 minutes with me versus you is probably more valuable with you than me. So I'll try and bring you through this. Again, my name is Trevor MacDonald. I come from the startup community. I've been in startup for over a decade. I've done a lot of different things in startup, from cold calling. I've cold called the startup to exit, essentially, for SEO lead gen in the Canadian legal industry. I've worked in SaaS with respect to a IT tool, Passportal. It was exited, I guess, back in 2019 to SolarWinds. I've been a part of CrowdLink, which was acquired, merged with Intellityx last year. And that dealt with mobile payments and payment identity solutions, with ticketing particularly. And I was kind of in a space where I needed to do something. And Sam Jenkins over at PunchCard is a friend of mine. And I was looking for something to do. And he's like, hey, we have this project within PunchCard called AlignTime, which is basically a SaaS product that was built out of a hackathon, which is not the typical way that products are built. Usually they're built more by a market demand and validation that way. Whereas this was born internally. It was built, few barriers to building it. And then after it was built, it was like, okay, let's go sell this. So AlignTime is a SaaS product, a middleware product that basically lives between your time tracking solution and your chat comm solution. And in our case, because of our limited our development and time we've spent with it, we're exclusive right now to Harvest. and working with people that have Harvest and they're using chat comms such as Slack or MS Teams to manage their projects. So what AlignTime does is basically sits between these two platforms and helps you sync over Harvest project data and productivity data into your chat comms, where they get actually seen with higher engagement. Because natively, for instance, Harvest, for instance, will send you notifications or reports and updates. They all go to email where they die. Nobody opens email anymore internally, unless it's from a client. You probably don't go into Outlook looking for a whole lot of things. So the fall off is quite high and filtering is quite high for Harvest notifications and this type of engagement. So what we're able to do is allow you to sync your two platforms into AlignTime and bring staff notifications directly into DMs. So I will hit someone up and say, hey, you're short 6 hours or 5 hours today, directly in their chat DM where they see it, and I can qualify that they've seen it. And the other thing we do is we bring productivity reports right into chat streams that would be like product related chat streams. So if you had a team and a chat channel that you were using to discuss a certain product build or problem, here's our live report right now. Maybe brought to us weekly, maybe brought to us daily, but we can all go in there and reference it, and we know exactly where our burn up, burn down rates are, how much time and hours have been spent on what tasks, and what team members have been in there working on what. And so I can show you a bit about that later on after we go through this. But the big thing is that this doesn't go to email. It has a higher engagement in chat. Now, what we save is basically time for project managers looking for project time. We're trying to help mitigate that effort that they spend on a weekly basis, talking to team members, saying, hey, I need your hours for this, I need your hours for that. And it just gets more fever pitch as you get closer to Friday. If anybody here has worked in billable hour scenarios or agencies, you're probably familiar with either being that person who's chasing that time or someone who's being chased for it ongoing. So we can save a lot of productivity in that space, but also in bringing those reports into a conversation space such as chat allows for more transparency and accountability with your project. So hours that, say, for instance, the developer might say, well, I took 20 hours and I buried it somewhere doing an update for something and I didn't tell you about it. And then Friday, me as a junior PM got a phone call from the client saying, hey, we're almost done the sprint. Can you get X, Y, and Z in there just for me? It's just something we were talking about. And as a junior PM, I'm like, yeah, sure, I'd love to make you happy. Yes. And I'll go down the hall and talk to my developer and find out that we're 20 hours behind on a project that I didn't know we were 20 hours behind on. And we all know that 95% of the time, there's no way I'm going to ask the client to pay for that. It's money that we eat inside the agency. So we'll talk about that $2,000 to $4,000 sometime at your review. But in the meantime, we have to find those 20 hours and get this done because I've made a mistake as a PM, because you didn't put your time in and I didn't have the most current data. If we had this in a chat somewhere, we would say, hey, like, that's behind. By the way, there should be 20 more hours in there. I'll get those to you. Good to know. When Steve or Mary calls me on Friday afternoon asking me for something, I will tell them no, or politely get around that. So as I said, saving time and money, increased transparency, increased accountability. And something that we've found that really resonates with people is increased engagement in a remote environment that we're all working in right now. Project managers that are in charge of complex builds do have this sense of that they don't have the same tabs on their team members as they did before. And what they've found in using AlignTime is that it's perked up their engagement with those team members. And so people that do implement AlignTime usually see an uptick within the first 2 weeks where they say, yeah, like hours are getting in more efficiently than they were before with less work. That's fantastic. And these reports are great. So it does help improve that project management situation. We are a very good value at only $2 a head starting. It goes up from there depending on what modules you add into your account. But right out of the gate, $2 a head, fantastic value for a SaaS. And our setup is in minutes. It really is a very fast onboarding process. So we like to pride ourselves on that as being able to bring people on with not a lot of hassle or a lot of confusion. Also very minimal disruption with this product. So it really kind of sleeps into what you already have existing and works almost seamlessly without much notice. You can set up AlignTime as a PM and you wouldn't really tell anybody and not a lot would change other than, hey, I'm getting these notifications now. What's that all about? Oh, well, you haven't given us our time.
So Trevor, I guess I want to pause just to let the team know, because I see folks writing notes. And I'm just looking at the time, like I think you've given us like a really great overview of what you do, but what I saw in the email to us yesterday was your biggest challenge, right? Like, I think what you told us is if you can get somebody on the phone, fantastic. But I think what I was reading yesterday is, you've got a very narrow market. I think what I looked up is there's 40,000 Harvest users. So then within that, right, there's only so many on Teams and Slack. So I think what hopefully Bryan and Trent and Jordana and Patrick can help you with is, like, are you finding a hard time getting the interest from those people, or are you finding having a hard time finding them?
Finding them. And I didn't want to, I wanted to give you kind of the overview pitch there, but yes, Francois, totally on point there. That's exactly where we're going with this, and that we are, because of development resources, we have been pinned into a corner where we're only serving exclusively Harvest time tracking users. So in my sense, I mean, if I was on the phone with you, my pitch is it can be very short. Hi, do you use Harvest as time tracking? No. Well, this flow chart is done. I mean, the best I can do is ask you, like, what do you use for time tracking? Because I will take that information, put it in a log somewhere, and eventually I go back to my developers and say, I think toggle's our next move if we're going to plant a flag in the sand. I only know that because of all the people who told me, no, this is the product they told me they were using. But that is really the most value I can get out of that, aside from asking that person if they do know any Harvest users. The second, if I do jump through that hoop of fire and they say, yeah, we do use Harvest, I say, fantastic. Do you use Slack or MS Teams to manage your projects? And if they do, we have a conversation. But if they don't, we don't. And the reality being that what I've found, we didn't know a lot about Harvest users when we got into this. We built it for Harvest because we used Harvest, not because we did any particular market research around who Harvest was or what they served. It was really out of circumstance and an internal hackathon that arrived us at Harvest. So I have this nut to crack where I have 40,000 organizations they claim to serve. I am finding, going through follower lists and whatnot, that I suspect a lot of the Harvest users are one-off users that at most serve maybe, one or two other subcontractors. A lot of them are freelancers that probably have a subcontract somewhere overseas with one or two other people, and they use Harvest to manage that. And I find a lot of musicians and other people that are not using Slack or MS Teams. So I spent some time originally when getting into this. I looked at law firms, accounting firms, engineering firms, IT firms, and I hit all those as billable hour spaces to find out if any of them were using Harvest. The majority of them came back with, I don't know what Harvest is. So that wasn't encouraging. I mean, I didn't find anybody in those silos that were using Harvest. So we went back to what we knew, or what we thought we knew, natively to our experience being in media development, digital media development. We knew we had some friends using Harvest because we've seen it, we use it ourselves. So we went back to that safe place. I called 50 people in the city. Some of them I knew. I got one client that has a firm of 20 people, and the other two people are less than 5 people, and they barely use Slack for managing projects, simply because they're not big enough. And the other reality being that if you're using Harvest, it's kind of like riding the bus in time tracking world. Like, you're at the lower end of the licensing tool set. So if you are using Harvest, chances are you probably don't have money for MS Teams.
So let's pause there. I'd love to hear some questions right now from Trevor, Jordana, Bryan. I see some note taking and head nodding. Go ahead, Trent. Start us off.
Yes, obviously the TAM is a challenge, right? So it sounds like the most constructive use of this time would be how to ask better questions for companies that are in the industries that you've identified, right? So like agencies, for example, or professional service firms. Try to get your finger on the pulse of, what, if it not Harvest, like what is the next use case? Mm-hmm. And if you find the next use case and start to like develop a priority list from there, again, how many of those are using the collaboration tool such as Slack or Teams, given the new remote work and work from home environment? I think that would probably be my best advice.
We are tracking that with the people that we've spoke with inside of if you look at law or engineering or accounting and IT, I can speak to IT a bit more intimately, but those other three, those professional service areas, they really use software packages that are native to their industry, and they don't deviate from them. You know, it's a very rigid place where you're like, we've been using Pro Law for 10 years and it integrates with our invoicing. It's not sexy, and it's not expensive, but we've been using that at our law firm since the beginning of time. And law firms and accounting firms and engineering firms don't seem to pivot away much from what they're using for tool sets. You know, like for an engineering firm, for instance, like, yeah, we got acquired. Suddenly we were an SAP company or an Oracle company, and everything that was in that suite with Oracle came with us. And that's where we're at now. And like, we're not looking at any like one-off time trackers. Everything's very enterprise. And in the IT industry, they really are very, I hate to use the word incestuous, but they only trust their own. Like they typically in IT only use software that's been made by people from the MSP space, because they just say like, you don't understand us if you're from an outsider. And there's also a lot of socializing that goes with the MSP space. Like you got to make a few trips to Vegas, drink some drinks, shake some hands. It's very channel sales focused, if you're familiar with channel sales at all in any other industry. So you know that you have to make those rounds and do those sponsorships at conferences and that kind of thing. So getting back to, yes, the media space, we do find there is a flippancy of people moving from product to product. I've had people tell me like, we went to Monday because 5 of our project managers just like the look of it better. No business case at all. Just like, it's prettier, it's trendy. We moved to Monday. Oh, okay.
Jordana, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You're on mute.
Yeah, no, so I was just, I think what Trent called out is a really great way to spend the time. I mean, one of the questions that I have in my mind, since my area of expertise is really the sales conversation, is when you do find those, that right user who has Harvest and is actively using Slack and have the, the funds and all that stuff, do you go into startup pitch mode, the 3 to 5 minute kind of pitch, or do you go into a kind of needs development and discovery conversation? And that's just something that's on my mind as a question.
In early days, I've done a lot of soft selling, or like stealth selling, I guess I'd say, where I go in and, I mean, very early days, I would tell them I'm a software developer. I'm a software developer. I'm just building some software around time tracking. Tell me more about your problems. Like, what do you use for it? What do you like about that particular product? And then you kind of get into this thing of, well, like, we're building this thing. Like, if you do have Harvest, that's interesting. And the people that didn't have Harvest, I'd really spend time trying to figure out why they liked what they were using. And really for me, my major challenge is, I have a lot of soft sales right now. What do? I save you time. I save you money. I raise engagement. I raise transparency of a project and accountability of those who are in it. All those are very soft things. There's nothing quantitative about them. I don't have enough experience yet with the product where I can say, I can save you 15% on your Geico insurance in 15 minutes on a phone, right? Like, I don't have that quantitative pitch where it's like, right out of the gate, I'm going to save you 15% in time, or I'm going to save you this much money, or I could give you some kind of formula to quantitate how much money you would save if you scaled it in your situation. I don't have that experience yet, and I'm looking for those stories. I'm trying to find those stories with people that I'm in. We do that with people that we don't know that are using other products. And we definitely do it with people that were our alpha users right now, and trying to solicit a story from them. For instance, Keen Media, I'll be talking with them on Monday, I guess. And she told me, she's like, she's running the service right now for free. We're like, just take it. Take the full suite. You got 25 people there. Run it. Use it. Tell me more about it, after using it. And so things I want to know from her is like, am I asking too much money for the budget you currently run? Is this too much of an overhead for you to go from $2 to $8 if I want the full suite? Are the bots effective? Is the product, the features effective? Has it moved the needle for you? What's the reaction of people? Has it been disruptive, non-disruptive? So she wants to get back to me. She's like, I needed probably a month to play with this to really give you some constructive feedback. I'm looking forward to that on Monday, but I'm hungry for those engagements with people to try and get that information so I can craft a story that I can synthesize down to something I can put on a banner somewhere or use as a tagline, you know, where I can sell on that and make it more succinct for them. Like, oh, there you go. Like, I understand the dollars and cents of what you're saying.
Patrick and Brian, I see in the chat you guys are throwing up a bunch of numbers there. So I don't know if you cracked something new that we didn't know about the total addressable market.
What? Go ahead, Patrick. You got it.
I just did a search on ZoomInfo because right now, like, we're doing the same thing. I'm trying to do campaigns on people that use Salesforce, and I've been using ZoomInfo to do a technology search to find contacts that have that tech that's been scraped by ZoomInfo. And I did that search for Harvest, and I found 86,000 contacts that are currently using Harvest. So I was just thinking that might be a good way. ZoomInfo.
Okay, interesting. I've not used that. No.
So Patrick, just to help us, and Trevor, obviously, like, this isn't saying they work for Harvest. This is saying they've, like, the filter you've used has said they're a user that has somehow identified that they're working with Harvest.
Yeah, that they use Harvest, exactly.
Cool. So the 40,000 Harvest customers could be organizations.
That's how they're sold, as organizations.
The logos, 40,000 logos, and it could be an employee of one, or it could be an employee of 50. So you know, what I'm hearing, Patrick, is like, you know, case in point, in your case, you're saying, okay, we want to go after people using Salesforce. And I'm guessing when you've done those filters, you're segmenting it, right? To, you know, whatever, 1 to 5 employees, 5 to 50, and then you're doing specific campaigns after those folks.
Exactly. Yeah, it's mostly vertical based. So I'd say, like, I want to find software companies that use Salesforce that are 50 to 500. That would be my campaign.
So we've been doing that through LinkedIn with their network tool. And then in Twitter, we've been following basically everyone, like, reasonably at a pace with Harvest, that are Harvest users. And we're kind of split. Like, the old school way of doing it would be like cold calling. But when I did a SaaS, like, there was no way we could cold call the SaaS. Like, it just wasn't as smart. There got to be a point where, like, your digital online assets were going to well outperform whatever you were doing with a phone as a single person. So we have really doubled down our efforts on that in focus towards Harvest content and users. So we've started a podcast. We have social media on Twitter and LinkedIn. We're not going to Facebook or Instagram yet, just because we want to stay in these two to figure this out first. We're blogging weekly around project management and time tracking content, trying to bring people in through that. And I guess
Brian, I saw when he mentioned cold calling, I saw your eyes perk.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I mean, it seems like you're doing a lot of stuff, Trevor, which I got to give you a tip of the hat, man. You're doing a lot of stuff there, but I might bring it back to the foundation, right? Let's go back to the 101. You've talked about engagement, time, money, transparency, all of these different things. And I would even boil it down, sift it down even more simplistic than that. What's the one problem that you solve?
I thought it was saving project managers time and money finding data that was important to their projects, like missing data. Something that I've found that has been like a more overall background trigger or hot button has been the term engagement. This is something that I would use passively as, like, you know, one of my 3 bullet points when pitching this. And people do perk up, PMs perk up around engagement, owners perk up around engagement, especially in the digital space where we are easily remote, and a lot of us are now working remote. That seemed to be an emotional trigger for people who are like, oh yeah, like, that's something that keeps me up at night, engagement. I don't know.
Why is that important?
In my particular context, I mean, I can't speak to the other facets of a company and problems of engagement that you might have with an employee, and you know, things they would share or not aptly share with you, depending on the circumstance. But within regards to a project itself, there does seem to be this anxiousness amongst project managers that the teams that they're working with, the people that are working with on these projects, are not spending the time or the interest that they had when they were in a seat under a ceiling, everyone's eyeballs were under the roof. And that seems to be a real fear for people. They don't, and I haven't had anybody tell me that it's like really a problem that they've been able to qualify, but they do tell me that it's something that they worry about. And it's like, yeah, this is like raising engagement with our remote employees is something that we as managers, management period, discuss. When you take it down to me on a project management level, yes, it's something I carry with me. And when you said you could raise engagement with my employees as far as getting time into me or having awareness of what's happening within my project, because it's in chat rather than in an email, that interests them. So that, sorry.
And I would no, and this is the exercise that I would keep doing, and I think Patrick is really good at this too, because he did this to me whenever I was on here. But it's really, you know, uncovering that why, getting to that problem that you solve. Because if you get that problem that you solve, so your ultimate problem is going to manifest itself in low engagement, poor time usage, money wasted. So if that's how it shows, if those are the visible characteristics, what's the underlying root cause of all of those things happening? So that's, if you can get down to the root cause problem that you solve, that's really where the nirvana is, because now you can speak to that and you can just simply do the math formula off of that, right? So, okay, if it saves you time, how long are you doing it? How long does it take you to do this? How long is the hourly rate? And you can do math formulas to it, right? So you simply do the, you know, I can't believe I'm saying this. Mr. Shoemaker, who told me I wasn't any good at math, would have been proud of me. But you just do the word formula, right? The word problem to this.
That's exactly as I was saying earlier, like that pitch or that quantitative statement that I'm trying to put together. And it would be, like you said, you know, like if you had a project manager, how much time do you spend chasing time in your week? Probably like real time, added up, 2 hours. Okay, so if I give you an hour back of that because your employees have higher engagement and give you your hours when you want them, you only spend an hour doing it. Let's say we bill you out at $1.50 an hour. So, you know, over the course of a month, I can save you $600 in billable hours, not chasing time. And that's like, okay, that's interesting. One story that really kicked over for me was that, as I said, like that scenario I mentioned to you earlier, where the senior project manager that I was talking to, she's like, I'm not so worried about this for me. It's me putting this in place to help junior PMs. I'm worried about them doing exactly what I described to you, your panel here, being that like, I said yes when I should have walked down the hall and checked first, because I know that developer didn't actually give me all of his hours. And that was, she described me, she's like, yeah, that was a total straight up $5,000 problem. Like right off the top, $5,000.
Go ahead, Jordana.
Well, I was just, Bryan, I think the question you asked about what problems it solves is a really good one. And Trevor, you started to go down the path of aspects of the problem that are more interesting to me and potentially more compelling than time and money. Like every product declares that it's going to save you time and money, but part of what you expressed more emotionally about like the worry that people aren't, you know, that because they don't have their eyeballs on them, like there's even if you can't, like, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think you need to put a dollar figure to that worry in order for it to necessarily be impactful, or even just like the frustration of like, so talk to me about like how you typically chase up your PMs to get their hours. Like, what does that look like? How does that friggin' feel, right? And inevitably they're going to be like, it's the worst part of my day, and I would probably pay anything to make it go away, if you're able to really marinate in getting a sense of like what that feels in their working life. And that's powerful.
I mean, this goes very down. Like, I'll tell you what, when I was doing cold call sales with the law firms, like criminal lawyers are the hardest people to sell in the world, because like 85% of their day is spent with people lying to them. So when you go in with like a too good to be real pitch, they're just like, get out. Like, unless a lawyer gave me your name and number and told me to talk to you, get out of my office. It's super hard. But in there, I created a quantitative formula of argument for why they should do business with me. I was like, you're losing money not doing this. Now, I got to get stuck in that way. Well, you're talking about that emotional sale. I believe that. And I get more into it as I talk to people more. As I was saying, like, I said to my owner, Sam, I was like, you know, Sam, I'm even thinking about like dropping the transparency and accountability and just going all in on engagement. Because that is a theme, because it seemed like that theme woke people up talking to them about it more than anything else. That was a trigger word.
Mm.
And I was talking to this guy who uses Harvest for invoicing. And so to what you're talking about, he's like, yeah, you know, Harvest has this amazing invoice bot. I was like, oh, really? And he's like, yeah, I mean, like I wasn't going to get a sale with him. He's like, I'm not interested, but let me tell you about like Harvest billing. It's like, okay. And he's like, yeah, it's this bot, and it basically chases up your accounts receivable with anybody that hasn't paid you yet after 30 days. I was like, oh, wow. He's like, yeah, you can customize it, make it as nice or nasty as you want. And I love it. You know, I asked him, I was like, do you have an accounts receivable problem? He's like, no, I don't, but I still use it. Like for the 10 to 15% of my friends that forget to pay me, I make it work for them. And for him, he was like, the emotional release he had from not having to worry about chasing up money. He's like, the bot's just out there doing it, nagging them. And he said to me, he's like, you know, when people actually do call me back to give me money late, I'm actually almost concerned, like, was the bot too hard on you? Like, was it okay? Was it too rough? Like, why are you like, but he was very aware that he was like, this works, and it takes like all this mental stress off of me. It wasn't a money problem for him. He's like, I don't have a problem collecting money, but the emotional weight it took off of him to not have to do the chasing for the 10 to 15% was like, he said to me, he's like, I think I pay $14 a user for Harvest. He's like, if that was $4 off the top, I'm paying that every day.
If you, Trevor, just going to quickly say, Francois, sorry, if you, Trevor, could tell us, you're looking for stories, tell a story like that about the emotional experience of what it's like to use your product, that would be powerful.
Go ahead, Trent. Go ahead. You had your hand up.
Yeah, these are all awesome things to think about: positioning, messaging, storytelling, all like great once you get there. I think what we're really trying to identify though is like, what's the proper go-to-market strategy with this? And like cold calling for a $2 a seat engagement is, in my opinion, not a great use of time. And I sell a $9.99 a month SaaS tool, and okay, great. If I get Warner Brothers on the phone and I can socialize Pre-Write within all 500 of the writers and producers, that's worth my time. But like one thing I wanted to ask Trevor is, have you guys like worked with Harvest? Have you collaborated with Harvest on anything? You have?
So it's not easy working with Harvest. We've talked to a number of other friends of ours that are SaaS products that work with Harvest. It is kind of an empty place. Someone always emails you back with a mystery fake email, like Emily from, you know. But for us, we went through the process of getting ourselves. For them, they were like, "Listen, we'll totally put you in Marketplace, but you got to get into Slack and MS Teams first. Jump through their hopes of fire, then come over and talk to us." Great. So we did that, and now we're waiting to go into Harvest Marketplace to be released there. PPC wise, so we're spending not a lot, but we're starting to spend money on pay-per-click just to try and figure out if we can use that to narrow in Harvest users. So how do I like get rid of the toggles, timesheet, T-sheets, and all those guys? How do I make ads that are only for searches that are somewhat long tail around Harvest products and needs? And that's Google does, you have to play a little cat and mouse with them and using brand names in your ad content. Luckily, Harvest and Slack are relatively, you know, generic terms. They're not branded like Microsoft, for instance. But we are doing that as an effort to try and bring people qualified through the funnel. And as I said, you know, with respect to all of our social media, we're going after Harvest specific users. We're very dialed in on that, trying to make them, you know, content that makes them laugh or get interested in what we're doing. And then, you know, as I said, the organic content creation, whether that be the podcast or I write a blog every week, and then we make a podcast at the end of the week, touching on pieces of that blog. And then we loop it all back to be like, hey, if you want to see the whole blog, go to AlignTime.com. You get the cycle. You know what I'm doing there.
Go ahead, Bryan. Go ahead.
Hey, real quick, Trevor, I might encourage you to do this. Don't spend money until you figure out what that problem is, right? Because if you're going to spend that money to help you with that targeting, with that messaging, I might really encourage you to save that money and then do some product. Like, would you say that you have product market fit yet?
I don't have enough users to tell you whether I do or not. I mean, I'm almost in like,
So with that said, so no would be the answer, right? So with that said, I wouldn't do anything until I interviewed maybe 100 people, got their language, what's their frustration, got their stories, and then from those stories, get very, very curious whenever you're talking to them. Much like what Jordana was saying, because you have the right emotional words. Play on that. Well, what's that mean? What's that like in your world? Well, how's that impacting you? How's that affecting you? What's the dollars and cents, the time impact? How is, you're not losing clients over that, are you? So it's really getting curious on that. And if you do that 100 times, your information is going to come out. And then another tool that I might suggest to you, an awesome tool that I found, a woman by the name of April Dunford wrote a book called Obviously Awesome. Shameless plug for my my podcast. It was episode 51, I think. But it is an amazingly good book that gets into the targeting, the differentiation, so you can get to this. Because to your point, Trent, yeah, your customer acquisition cost has to be super low whenever you have a $2 per user per month kind of payment, and that gets into the targeting. Is whether you use an organization like Zoom or ours that does data as a service kind of thing, you have to be able to drill down there so you can be very specific on targeting. So maybe you start with companies that have 500 users. That way your customer acquisition cost is going to be okay with that many users to get some logos, to get some names. So then you can start going down the market, right? So some ideas
the
there.
challenge we have is that Harvest, as I said, like Harvest is it's the public transport of time tracking. We don't have, like, we've had a very hard time finding enterprises that use Harvest. Once you get to that point of, over 25 users or 25 seats, you get to 50 seats, you start getting into other products that are more encompassing, where you're like, I have a project manager, like Jira, for instance. We use Jira for everything. We do all of our time tracking through it. We strict everything down. That's what we use. We're that big of a company. We'd never use Harvest. I'm like, I gotcha. So I'm really like, I've found myself hunting between 5 people in a company to 25 people in a company, like that kind of a range, which, to your point with $2 a sale, where you're like, you're saying, I sell at 10 and I don't do cold calling unless it's a big company. I agree totally. And right now I'm struggling to find large companies that would qualify to use Harvest.
Trent, I'd like to circle back. Like let's put you on the spot. So let's say Trevor says, okay, I'm hiring you, Trent, for, I don't know, a week or a month. What would you like? Where would you start to dial in and narrow the focus?
Yeah, so I just went to LinkedIn Sales Nav, and I went to Harvest, and I looked to see who all their employees are, and there are, I think, 4 or 5 people in marketing, a couple product managers as well. Yep. I would develop amazing relationships with those people and talk about like what their customers' experiences are with Harvest, and try to identify some pits or some valleys in the process, right? Throw customer success in there as well. I would invite those people from Harvest onto your podcast and talk about all the great things Harvest does and how some of these other third-party products from their marketplace are integrating to create a much more robust experience. And then I would repackage all of that content that you're creating, and try to co-develop additional content from that, and 2, distribute that content directly in your sales channels, which you're doing, I think sounds like via cold calls, cold emails, and that sort of thing. But I would work with Harvest as much as possible, because that actually might speed up your placement in their marketplace. And
yeah. And have you said, Trevor, that they're hesitant to work with you, or they haven't just been very responsive? Like, are you a threat?
Well, okay, I'll pitch that to you too, because this is a conversation that we have where we can't be too bothered to be too scared, but they do, like the people we've spoke with that have had previous engagement with Harvest, they weren't very helpful at all. They didn't tell us anything about their market or their users. They didn't really push us any more than just putting us in the marketplace, and that's your existence. There was no special help or input or intel that way. I mean, I would love if I was to ask anyone from Harvest something, I'd say, can you give me your industry breakdown? can you just tell me, like, I think you have this many of your users in digital media production. What other silos do you have of industry? Because I have come across other people that use it. Like, as I said, I found an insurance adjustment company that was using it for their remote staff doing claims adjustments. They don't use Slack or Teams, so we don't have a sale there. But I was like, I'm surprised you're using this. They're like, well, this is what we use. I mean, I've had a lot of people in the music industry that seem to be using Harvest for one reason or another. They're not using Slack or Teams from what I've found either, but I thought that was interesting. I was like, oh, I wouldn't have expected you to be using this. So if I was to ask them something, I'd be like, can you give me what your silos look like and like how full the buckets are? At least give me like an idea of what area of the woods I should be hunting.
But Trevor, let me jump in here, because I mean, in the world I live in, we're a partner reseller, so we'll deal with somebody who would say, hey, we have this solution. And I think, quite frankly, if somebody would say, hey, we want to know how we can sell our product into your marketplace, we'd say, well, what's in it for us? And so if I was Harvest, I'd be like, unless you're helping me sell more Harvest licenses, I think, quite frankly, they don't really care. Like, unless they don't even care if people love the product more or there's engagement. They're just saying, look, unless you're putting more money in my pockets, I don't know why they would want to help you.
The second part of this is that we wonder, like, how, I mean, as they created an invoice bot, I'm like, why don't they just roll over and take what we've done and put it into their $9.95 as like, hey, we ran out of good ideas until you guys came along. Thanks. We got a dev team like 5 times the size of yours. We'll get this knocked out in a month. Your company's dead. How did we forget to like stream all this stuff over to chat? Brilliant idea over there, AlignTime. Thank you. So I do, like, sometimes me and Sam like wrestle with that, being like, how close should we get to like Harvest people, within the company? It's one thing to deal with them on the marketplace, but do I want to start like putting all these ideas out within the company that could easily roll over and just quash what we're doing? I don't know if that's just like, if that's fake fear. Like, I've made that up in my head. That's not real. I mean, it's kind of like people that go to talk to VCs and want an NDA signed before they say anything. It's like, dude, come on. Like,
Trent, I see, like, you got some follow up there.
Yeah, well, I guess what's at stake for AlignTime, right? Like, it sounds like this was a project that was born out of an internal hackathon, and you're trying to see if this thing's got legs. Would an acquisition be the worst thing? Would running out of runway be the worst thing? Like, what's at stake in terms of this project?
I can't imagine anyone acquiring us. Like, we don't have any users, and what we created was a relatively novel bot. But I mean, it's not as if there's any IP there that you'd be acquiring. There wouldn't be. If anything, Harvest would have an easier time getting to where we got than we did, faster than we did, and like, a fourth or fifth of the time. It's whether they could be bothered to do it or not. So that does exist in my head as a fear, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't, like, what would I lose? The company, the opportunity to make $2 a head. That's what I would lose.
But is the question you're asking, Trent, ultimately, like, Trevor and his team need to probably maybe put some goalposts in to say, look, if we can't identify this many users or get this much traction by this date, then it's probably game over.
I have just really quickly, I was going to ask, are there any other products that do the same thing outside of the Harvest ecosystem?
Yes. We have found one company called ChatGenie that works within the IT MSP space. And they essentially do what we do, but they do it with, in IT, it's more ticket-based, like ticket submission and completion for service. And they do that with chat. They basically take all those service tickets and they put them into a chat, similar to what we would do. They take your reports, put them over there. Not the same, but kind of the same.
Well, I just asked because, like, the fact that this came out of a hackathon is awesome, but like, what's to stop you from taking the technology and building it for a larger addressable universe? Not to be fatalistic about this attempt, but I am curious.
I think so the only way we can grow this as middleware is through integrations. We would have to, as I was mentioning earlier, like the intelligence of knowing who doesn't want to do business with you and why, being like, oh, because you're a Toggle user. You're like the 4th Toggle user I've spoke with today. There must be something to that. hey guys, I think our next integration is going to be Toggle. But the problem being that we, as a small consultancy business here in Edmonton, we don't have a money tree. This is all bootstrapped. And so, and I'm very much late to the game. I joined, this project started in February or March of 2020. And I didn't join PunchCard until early mid-December. So of that year. So I'm very much like, I don't have anything to do with how that was built, brought up to. It's like, this is what we've got. Please take it to market and try and find us some users. And that has been a bit of a challenge. I mean, when I did a SaaS for the IT industry, our CEO, Colin Knox, was like, hey, I've spent 2 years looking for this tool that doesn't exist at our MSP level. And I know a lot of people at conferences that also want it and don't have it. I think we should go build it. Okay, like wisdom of crowds. We built this purely out of circumstance. We had an internal.
You guys had a problem that you guys had and you solved it. And so the assumption was there's got to be other people with this same exact problem. And, I think what we're trying to dial in today is like, okay, how many other people have that problem? So 40,000 logos of Harvest, that's one thing. I think Patrick threw out, what it was, 80,000?
85,000 users, yeah.
85,000 users, but I mean, I'm sure somebody here there's probably different formulas, right? Like there's probably only a certain percentage that are using Slack or Teams, and then even a percentage of those that could be customers. Patrick, I wanted to throw this question at you, like when it was back to the engagement comment that Trevor made, so you guys obviously have competitors in your space. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, like getting that digital signature is probably kind of the end goal, but like, do you guys find there's often things in between like engagement that are more emotional that people go, oh yeah, that's like, when 8 people internally got to deal with this document, that's one of our biggest headaches.
Yeah, and you also need to think like the person you're talking to often isn't the end user, right? And I think a lot of salespeople make the mistake of talking about the problem the end user faces when they're talking to like a VP or C-level person. And then of course it doesn't land because they don't feel that problem. When I was looking at your website, Trevor, the thing that I found most engaging was actually the project planning aspect and the ability to make better decisions. Because that reminds me of a pain that I exploit at PandaDoc is like, how are you guys forecasting right now? Because I know that your quarterly forecast is going to affect your budget for the next quarter and who you can hire and headcount and everything. So how are you making sure that's accurate, not just like self-reported opinion?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's like probably the most emotional one, where I'm sure there's been problems where they've like allocated the wrong resources to a project and it's just gone terribly and potentially taken down a department. You could see like change management going wrong and completely crushing a department.
So
and that's something I would definitely exploit as well.
So Patrick, I'll ask you the same question. If Trevor got to second you for a week or a month, what would you do to maybe help like narrow down? Like, would you take that list of 86,000 and start narrowing it down and start maybe asking those questions?
Oh yeah, I mean, like I found this list. You could also add Slack and Teams to it, so you could find people that are just using all those tools. And that would probably like have some sort of email blast that goes out to people that are probably under like 250 employees. And then anybody above a certain count, I would put into like a manual sequencer and start reaching out to them, because some of these people probably have hundreds of users they're using
What do you
Harvest.
mean by manual sequencer?
Like SalesLoft or an Outreach, like putting them in like a cadence tool that has like email templates and call steps set up.
But would you go email and phone, Patrick? Like what would your mix be there?
Oh yeah, 100%. I would run it like a normal sales sequence. So like start with a call, send an email right after, send a LinkedIn message, connecting as much as possible because it seems like you're very content focused. So trying to draw them into your inbound funnel in some way through that as well would be helpful. And then run like a 14-day sequence with like 6 or 7 calls and 6 or 7 emails on anybody that's over a certain employee count.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Brian.
So I put in gentleman's name is Steve Blank, and he has a ton of content on YouTube and has his own podcast. I would, going back to what I said earlier, know what if there's product market fit. Before you start to go too far into this, find out is there product market fit, or did you simply solve a problem that nobody else has, right? So find out if there's product market fit. And then from there, what's your exit? Start with the end in mind and reverse engineer it. If you start with the end in mind, reverse engineer it, about the problem you solve because I have product market fit. Now I can do value-based pricing as opposed to, hey, do you have this in their budget? What's the value that you're bringing? So now you do value-based pricing, and it just completely changes everything. So make sure there's that product market fit, and then you might find that this platform that you're using, because it's kind of the public bus, maybe you get away from that as quickly as possible and roll it into something else. So, but without that product market fit and knowing what the end is, and then reverse engineering, you're just kind of busy. And so it looks good. I'm feeling busy. I feel like I'm doing stuff, but my fear is you're just spinning your wheels.
With that product market fit, it's like, is the TAM, as you discover, like large enough to justify the kind of investment on this? The public
and what's everybody's thoughts? And I don't know what your thoughts are, Trevor, on like just getting more free, like is maybe a 10 or 20 company campaign to just get it into more organizations worth it? But I think we all know that people having a free product don't give you the same feedback and aren't really as invested as when they're actually paying for it. So that's a double-edged sword that I don't know what you guys all think. I mean, it's great because you can start to get more data and they can say, oh, cool, it's solving their problem. But if you give it to them, it's not the same as if they were actually paying for it.
Yeah, and I have that conversation with everyone we give it to. Now, we give it to people that we have relationships with, where we have some type of a, personal back and forth. And I do, like when I talk to Lisa on Monday, I will try and reset her brain to be like, I need you to think about somebody who is a 20-person firm, not like you. And would you, and it's funny you mentioned like going from, is it a budget value versus, a value add, right? Where it's a value-based pricing. And right now I am very much stuck in like, how do I compare to the cost of toilet paper in your office, right? Like, where do I fit in there? And I'm trying to have a real conversation with her to be like, be hard with me, like don't stroke my ego here. Like, we need to figure out whether or not there's something here. And I'm at that place with Lisa where I'm saying to her, like, I'm trying to figure out if this is actually something for you. I'm being real about it. Sam and I are real about it. We've been at Startup for a long time. I've put a number of bullets in heads of ideas that have, went down the path. And
here you go, Trevor. You ready? Call her. What's her first name again?
Lisa.
Lisa. Hey, Lisa. All right, I'm sitting down. Break to me the bad news. You hated it.
Yeah, right. Just like set the bottom and then go up from there.
That's a start, and she's going to be, yeah, you're right, and the truth will come out. Or like, no, actually, it was really good. I was surprised. What?
I'm literally writing this down in like the biggest font. Like,
but
straight.
To be the contrarian, I mean, I would almost say, wouldn't you want to have to cold call someone and convince them even to take it for free? Like, I would almost want the toughest nut to crack. Like somebody was like, okay, yeah, actually, you got me to use it, and it's actually pretty useful. Because the problem is, like, what's that mom test, right? Like, your friends they're never going to be able to give you the critical feedback you need, right?
Yeah.
There's an emotional connection. Whereas if I cold called Trent, he's like, fine, I'll use it. And after a week, he's like, yeah, it did nothing for me. And he's going to be brutally honest, or he might be like, actually, it was actually pretty good. And I wasn't expecting that. And so, yeah, how do you?
Afraid of that. We're not afraid of that. We are like, we keep that on the table for people we talk to. Like, is this a bad idea? Help us. Like, if you're really our friends, you'll level with us and tell us like whether or not. And I've got friends that I was doing like mobile payments and payment identity networks with KYC networks and MasterCard, like complex stuff, like millions of dollars going through phones and not like losing tons of sleep. And I tell my friends that we made a bot, and they're like, well, I don't tell them we made a bot. I tell them what I made. They're like, what we're selling, like, it's a bot. I'm like, yeah, why are you gonna be like, it's a bot. It's a bot. And they're like,
but I remember,
you're not interested, right?
I can't remember. It was there's a fellow I follow, Dave Gernhardt, on the marketing side, and like bots and AI came up, and he was like, I hate that. I hate people using that nomenclature because it's confusing. It sounds way sexier than it really is. He's like, tell people basically how this thing is going to solve a problem for you. And I'm not saying you're leading with the word bot, but people, they either get excited for the wrong reason, or they hear bot and they're like, forget it, you're overcomplicating things. So he was like, it's basically an assistant, like it's going to do something for you. And I think back to, Patrick's point, okay, so time entry, pretty low. I mean, it's important, but in terms of like complexity, I think it's the lowest on the totem pole. But these other things that you can maybe enhance in terms of visibility into projects that cause all sorts of other domino effects, like, I guess I'm trying to figure out, and I don't have the answer, what's that language around the problem you're solving for someone, like through this virtual assistant. And I think that's the storyline that, Bryan and Jordana were saying, like emotionally, like people might be like, hey, these are just things you're not doing because you're busy, and this tool can help you with that. I don't know what everyone else thinks, but I think as soon as you get bot or AI in there, like sometimes it just muddies the water.
I agree. I stay away from it. Like, as I said, I would mention it. I would pitch my friends about this without using bot, and they'd call me on it being like, it's a bot. Like what you just described to me, it's a bot, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, it's a bot. Yeah, it is. Was that obvious? Like, is it that? It didn't? Yeah, no, it's a bot. I'm less interested, Trev. Like, you're just selling a bot. I got things to do. Bye-bye.
But maybe that begs the question then, like the piece that Patrick was talking about is a little bit meatier and a little bit more complex. So how do you surface that component of what you're doing? And I don't know enough about it to articulate it, but it sounds like that one's going to resonate more with people than just, okay, yeah, time is a pain, but we all do manual things sometimes because it's just a pain to figure out another solution, right? Like we all have something we do every day, and you're like, I should automate that, and here we are pounding it into Excel every day.
Let me ask you this. I am a one-man show. I'm writing everything. I'm doing a bunch of stuff I don't necessarily have an experience to. I've never done a podcast before. I'm writing and making one. Okay, let's go. So I have over here on Trent's side, Trent's like, dude, bringing water to the dead, calling people up for $2 a head, like using your phone. Like, you're right. Like, unless it's like 350 people or more, I'm not picking that phone up to call them. And, over on the other side, I have Patrick, who's like, here's Zoom info, 85K worth of people. You can pick up the phone, reach out and touch somebody, call, email, LinkedIn. I mean, there's your cadence map. Go hit them 7 to 8 times. Law of averages will work for you on that eventually, if you're in the right place. I'm only one person. I guess I kind of feel like I'm in the space of like when I'm working this, where it's like, I need to have a bunch of social presence, content, blogs, and podcasts to make me look like I'm actually not just one person, right? Like, I'm a bigger than I am company. You can trust us. We're legitimate. But I also look at that as being like, getting that stuff sorted would be like marketing automation that can work while I'm sleeping, right? Like it's indexing, bringing in people, trying to find users and bringing them organically through my funnel and improving that funnel online and converting. I guess I get caught between like, I got to fill the cupboards before I go back and start calling people again.
Well, let me go ahead, Jordana. I know you and Bryan have to run, so jump in and then I'll let Trent jump in.
I was just going to quickly say, Trevor, at this stage, given what everyone's saying, I'm not sure if the value of those cold calls is the $2 a head acquisition. I think it's the learning and the conversations with potential clients to really understand what's going on in their world so that you can then craft a more effective story. So in some ways, I think the value of those conversations at this stage is maybe higher than the dollar value you could bring.
I'd agree to that. I do spend, though, an incredible amount of resource. Like if I called 50 people in a 1 million person city, 50 agencies, I'm telling you, like, one of them is a legit customer out of 50, and 2 of them are just humoring me because they're 5 or less people. That's my experience so far. Like, I've been in Portland, St. Louis, Edmonton, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, a little bit of Toronto, but I'm finding a very high ratio of like no results to the amount of work that goes in. Like it's not very. And when I have those conversations, I do, man. I'm a chatty Cathy. If you get me on the phone, I will talk to you until you have to go. I will try and get as much from you as I can. But I do find that it's like, what'd you do today? I spend an entire day to talk to one person, or leave a voicemail maybe with one person that might call me back tomorrow. Is that a good use of time, or should I have been like writing blogs?
Right.
Thanks, Patrick. I know you got to run to Jordana, but Trent, I guess I'll ask you this final question.
Yeah.
I guess if you're like that last component, thanks, Jordana. That Trent, like that $1 million question that Trevor's asking, kind of to, if tomorrow you said, okay, Trent, you're either spending time, going to ZoomInfo, finding this and doing more research, or put the brakes on the content, like go and do just this validation? Like, where would you use that time?
Yeah, so this is like a real thing that I have to do at Pre-Write like all the time. Like, are we valuable enough at $10 a month to justify doing a whole bunch of content? And the answer is yes, if our ultimate path is being acquired by a larger organization, because they find so much value and so much strength in the volume that we have. That's the reason why we keep going with all of our stuff. I think the challenge, and the panelists talked about this, is like, okay, let's say 86,000 users exist in the ecosystem, and let's put them at $24 a year, right? That's a $2 million a year business with 100%
Penetration.
right? and we don't even know that, right? Because not all of them are Teams, not all of them are Slack, whatever. What I've gotten to in a point of my career is like, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. And if it's not like a hell yes, I'm going to get rich off of doing this by stepwising the approach. Like, is it worth doing? And again, not to kill the darlings, but I take a really hard look at like what I'm doing every single day and be like, what's the point? Like, what's the purpose of doing this? And for us, hopefully it's a big EBITDA multiple that some larger Adobe or otherwise organization wants to say like, yeah, we find value in that. You've already done the hard part of customer acquisition. Let's scoop you right up.
They buy the book. They buy the book. That's what they want. They're not interested in the IP.
Right.
They want the book. I mean, that's how it is in IT too. Like IT, they look at it as very like, we just gobble you into our tool set. You had users that we wanted to sell these things to that we weren't selling to before. You have them. We'll bring them in with your tool set and start selling them the other stuff that they didn't know they needed.
Yeah.
And that's really like the growth in that space, how that works. So I understand that. I do.
I got to bounce as well, but Trent, thanks for your time. Trevor, thanks for pouring everything out here and sharing that with us. But I'm sure if you want to reach out to Trent or some of the other folks through LinkedIn, just to follow up, they'll be happy to. So thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
You fellas, take care.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. See ya.